Actions speak louder than words. There is a story in the Bible about a father who has two children, and he speaks to one of his children and he says, "Hey, go, I want you to do this." And the child says, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And they go, and they don't follow through. They don't follow their father's instructions. The father has a second child, and he says to the second child, "Hey, I want you to go and do this." And the child says, "I am not going to do that," and goes away. And then he says, "You know what? I really should do what my father had told me to do." And he goes and he does what it is that his father asked. And the question is asked, which of these children did the will of his father? And obviously, it's not the one that said it. It's the one that actually did what his father said, even though at first he said no. You know, talk is cheap. It's so very easy to say things, but if we really want to showcase and demonstrate that we truly want to do something, we actually follow through with action, not just with speaking. When we look today at our passage in James chapter 3, picking up in verse 13 down through verse number 18, what we're going to see is James is telling those of us who are believers, and he's saying it in connection with the previous verses, that we don't need to use our mouth in order to display our wisdom, but we need to use our actions, our deeds. It's easy to say one thing, but what he's telling us is we actually need to make sure we follow through and do what it is that we are supposed to be doing. Let's go ahead, though, and review and bring us up. If you're new with us, we're going to just review the background information for the book and kind of bring you up to date through what James has said already to where we're going to be today. So James, the brother of Jesus, is the author of this epistle, this letter that he writes. He's writing to Jewish believers early in the first century who've been scattered because of persecution. He writes to them because he wants them to have success as they go through these trials. He encourages them to have the right behavior in their lives so that they can be successful. As a matter of fact, in chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, he gives his key verse which says, "This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God." In this passage, James gives us his headings, or the three major sections of the body, and he's going to speak to us, and we've already looked at what it means to be quick to hear, and today we're looking at the last part of what it means to be slow to speak, and finally we'll finish up the body with what it means to be slow to anger. If you prefer a more traditional outline, James gives his salutation, and then he opens up with a prologue, what he says before he gets to the main part of his book, and what he says is respond to trials properly. There's an improper response and there's a proper response. Make sure you respond properly. He then goes into his theme verses, which we just looked at, which is behave well in trials. And then he comes to the body, again, where we're going to be today, and he's all making the point that we need to cultivate the necessary behavior in our lives. And then finally, we'll see at the end where he's going to tell us persevere in trials to the end. The body of the book, if you look just a little bit closer, he has these three sections. We need to cultivate the necessary behavior by being swift to hear. Second, by being slow to speak, which is where we're going to be today. We saw, not last week, but the week before, we need to be slow to speak because the tongue is a dangerous instrument for displaying wisdom. And today we're going to see that we need to be slow to speak because holy conduct is a safe instrument for displaying wisdom. And then finally, the last section, which will encompass chapter 4 and a little bit of chapter 5, is that we need to be slow to wrath. Holy conduct is a safe instrument for displaying wisdom. And we're going to see in James 3:13 through 18 what he has to say today. But if it's not going to be too much of a distraction for you this morning, read these verses with me. Let's read through our passage today, just these 5 verses, and get the flow of thought of what James is going to say to us. In James chapter 3, beginning in verse number 13, he says, "Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. And the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. The outline that we're going to follow today for these particular few verses is, first, we're going to see a wise believer will show his wisdom by his conduct. We'll see that in verse 13. In verse 14, we'll see an unwise believer should not use his tongue to boast and lie against the truth. In verses 15 and 16, we'll see that an unwise believer's wisdom comes from below, and that a wise believer's wisdom comes from above, in verses 17 and 18. Let's go ahead and dive in and see first, a wise believer will show his wisdom by his conduct in verse number 13. As James begins speaking in this verse, he first asks a question, and the question is, who among you is wise and understanding? So he asked them, who among you? Among you is the body of believers, the Christians that he's speaking to. And he asks them very simply, who among you is wise and understanding? The word wise in this verse is the general word for wisdom in the New Testament. It's the word for the application of knowledge. So you have information, and how you apply it or put it into practice. That's wisdom in the simple idea of the word in the Bible. But then the next word for understanding, it's more so the idea of not just having wisdom, but also being experienced in putting that wisdom into practice. So when he says, who among you is wise and understanding, he's asking who understands to apply this and who has experience in applying this information. He's asking who among you is a wise, understanding person, someone who gets the truth. But what is the truth that he's talking about? Well, I think it's clear in the context when you look at the 12 verses before this. He's talking about who among you is wise in understanding that the tongue is a dangerous instrument for displaying wisdom, that our tongue is something where we both bless God and curse men. It's not supposed to be that way. That makes no sense. Our tongue is set among our members as something that's ignited on fire of hell. Our tongue is very dangerous among our members, or the members of our body. And so when he asks this question, who among you is wise and understanding about this truth, he then gives them a command. He gives them instruction. He says, let him show, a commandment, by his good behavior, his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. This sentence is a little bit out of order, so if you just take the heart of this sentence, he's saying, let him show his deeds. That's the heart of the sentence. He's saying, if you're somebody that is wise, you are going to show this wisdom by your deeds. And then he has two prepositional phrases in this verse. Actually, there are three, but two of them are tied together, so I'm just going to count them as two. By his good behavior, and then in the gentleness of wisdom. I appreciate you laughing at my grammar. So when you look at this verse, and he says, let him show his deeds, you're going to show your deeds by your good behavior. Now, the word for behavior and deeds, you would think maybe that's the same word, but actually they're two totally different words. When he says, let him show by his deeds, deeds are actions or works. But when he says by his good behavior, the word for behavior actually means conduct that has been informed by principles. So when he says to us we need to show our deeds by our conduct that's informed by principles. What principles? This wisdom and this understanding that our tongue is dangerous. And then we're going to show these deeds through this conduct. That's the way we're going to show it, by following these principles and working these things out through our lives. And then finally, in the very last line, he says that you're going to do this in a specific manner, in the manner of gentleness that comes from wisdom. You know, it's very easy in life to get arrogant. You get a few successes, you know a few things in life are going well. And James says here, when you're going to show these deeds, you're a Christian, you're doing what's right, yes, but you're going to show these deeds, and it's going to be in gentleness or in humility. You see, when we understand the dangers of the tongue, and we understand that each and every one of us has a tongue, every person in here is of equal level of danger. I can't sit here and say Jonathan Walton is great and spiritual. No. The tongue, it's right here. Still dangerous. So as I go and display wisdom, I'm going to do it in gentleness or with humility because, yes, that danger is still here. And it's a humility that comes from wisdom, from understanding the fact that, yes, my tongue is just as dangerous as every other person's. So if you are a wise person, you are going to show your works by your conduct in gentleness or in humility that comes from that wisdom. But number 2, an unwise believer should not boast and lie against the truth. Look at verse number 14. He says, but, and he's contrasting here what he's just said with what he's about to say. And in my mind as I read this, and if you're reading between the lines, it's as if James is saying, okay, if you're a wise person, by your conduct, show your deeds. But if you're not a wise person, and you're somebody that has bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant. This is a word for boasting, and so lie against the truth. You see 2 words that talk about using your mouth, being arrogant and lying against the truth. What I believe James is doing here is he's contrasting the wise person who shows through action and the unwise person who's going to just say, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to what the Word of God says. I'm going to use my words in order to display my wisdom. And I want you to pick up also that this person is somebody who has jealousy and ambition in their life that's motivating them. You know, when he says that our tongue is set on fire of hell, there's a lot of negative implications with that. And I think he's showing here that the jealousy and selfish ambition, these negative behaviors, they're tied along with this danger of the tongue. And he's warning, look, if you're somebody who's not going to be wise and you're going to just show through your own words the wisdom that you think you have, what you're going to do is you're going to boast, you're going to talk up. And by the way, this word for boast means to speak good about yourself by putting somebody else or something else down. And by doing this, you are lying against the truth that the tongue is dangerous. Now, I want to be clear. I want to go back and just define this bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. The bitter jealousy is harsh envy. It's looking at somebody else and saying, wow, they're great at playing music, or they're great at singing, or they're great at teaching, or they're great at service, or they're great at hospitality, and go, I want that, and being willing to do anything to get it. Or the selfish ambition is an ambition, a desire to reach and attain something, but for your own good, not for the good of the body, not like the person who serves as Christ would serve, for the good of the body as a whole, but saying, I want this for me. They have this position and they don't deserve it. It is for me. They have this honor and they don't deserve it. It is for me. I, me, my, it is for me. It is a selfish ambition. So he says very clearly, if you have this harsh envy and this selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant, do not be boasting and putting yourself up while pushing others down, and lie against the truth that is a danger to use your mouth to display your wisdom. He goes further than this, and in the next 2 points, he's going to describe the wisdom principles that motivate this mindset of the person that has bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. It comes from below. And then finally, we'll see the person who has the mindset or the wisdom that comes from above is the person who shows their wisdom through their deeds. Let's look at the next point. An unwise believer's wisdom comes from below. Look at verse 15 and 16. He says, this wisdom is not that which comes down from above. Okay? When I was a little kid, we used to be afraid to say bad words because, you know, mom has eyes in the back of her head. And we used to do and point down this way. And it's as if James is doing that as he says this. He's not saying a curse word, or he's not saying hell, which actually isn't a curse word. It's actually a real place. But it's as if he's going, look, this wisdom, it comes from below. And look, if you don't get what I mean by below, let me explain to you what I mean. He says, but this wisdom is earthly as opposed to having the heaven as its source. It is natural as opposed to having a supernatural source in heaven. And it is also demonic as opposed to that which is divine or that which is of God. And what is it that he's saying? If you have jealousy and ambition in your heart, the wisdom that motivates this is an earthly wisdom, is a natural wisdom, is a wisdom that is motivated by demonic influences, the fallen angels who help Satan to prosecute his purposes against us. That is where it comes from. He goes on and he says, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, where this envy and this selfish ambition exists, there is disorder and every evil thing. You know, it's very interesting. I don't think sometimes we credit disorder for something as bad as it really is. James is making it clear here, this jealousy and selfish ambition, these things that are a problem, that are motivated by a wisdom that comes below, where you find these things, you also find disorder. And along with disorder, rather than listing all the other things as bad as they could be, he just says, and every evil thing. If you're somebody who has jealousy, who has envy, and has this selfish ambition, and you're saying, I deserve this, and I should be able to get this for me and and you're willing to destroy and do whatever it takes in order to get these things for yourself, what you bring about within the church, within the body, is disorder. And along with that, every evil thing. There are enough people in here this morning who've been in some churches where there's been a person whose selfish ambition, their jealousy, has motivated them to destroy and brings disorder, where we're not following the order that God has set up with elders and the deacons and the people following the leadership in the order in which God has set it. But somebody says, no, I deserve this position. I should be in this position of authority. I will say what happens. And what do you see taking place now within the body of Christ? Destruction. And all manner of evil things going on. Sometimes it's hidden and it comes out later. Other times people know about it and just aren't willing to say it out loud. But this wisdom that motivates these things comes from below and brings about disorder and every evil thing. Finally, a wise believer's wisdom comes from above. Let's look at verses 17 and 18. He says, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering and without hypocrisy. What James does here in these verses is he actually describes the exact opposite of the person who has this jealousy and this ambition in their heart. This person who brings about disorder and every evil thing. I want to give you the definitions of each of these words as we go down, because he paints a very different picture. If you want to be somebody that has the wisdom from below, you can be that person who's jealous and has this selfish ambition and brings disorder in every evil thing. If that's what you want, great. But let me tell you, the person that's motivated by the wisdom above, the person who is going to demonstrate this wisdom by their action, not with their tongue, this person is first pure. And that word for purity has the idea of being without moral defect. In other words, there's not this thing where morally you are corrupted, being jealous and ambitious and allowing that to destroy your life. First of all, they are pure. But secondly, peaceable. That peaceable has the idea of being free from inner turmoil and worry. You know, one of the interesting things about Satan is a liar. He's a deceiver. And one of the things I think that I forget, maybe you don't, but I forget this, is Satan first himself has to be deceived as a deceiver. These people who have this jealous ambition, these people who believe this lie and follow this wisdom from below, they are themselves bringing the lie and the destruction in their life. They think if I attain and I get these things, I'll be happy. But the real lie is you're destroying yourself reaching out for these things. And in their lives, they don't have peace. There's no purity, but there's also not peace. There's all kinds of turmoil that's going on inside of them. Next, he says gentle. This word has the idea of being gracious or being forbearing. In other words, to say, no, not me, brother, you go first, and your interests can go first. You know, it's always interesting when you have a disagreement with somebody in church. I remember I was talking to somebody, and he was a pastor, and I was not at the time, and we had a disagreement about how to do something. And he said, no problem. We'll do it your way first. If that doesn't work, we'll try my way. Problem solved. That is a good picture of what it means to be gentle, to just, hey, it doesn't have to be my way. It doesn't have to be about me. It's not about plastering my name up there. We can do things your way. Next, he uses the word to be reasonable. That has the idea of being open to reason or being easily persuaded. I don't know if you've ever had this happen where you have a disagreement with somebody and you say, hey, look, let's just sit down and let's just work this out. We can reason with one another. And they go, nope, it's going to be this way. I'm not changing. Okay, that's the opposite of what he's talking about. We should be, if we have this wisdom from above motivating us, people that are open to reason, being easily persuaded. We're going to work this out together. He goes on and he says not only that they are reasonable, but being full of mercy or pity. In other words, when you look on somebody else, you want to show them kindness or you have concern about them. People with ambition and jealousy, this selfish ambition and jealousy that we're talking about, they're not concerned about other people. It is conquer, destroy, and dominate. And anybody who gets in my way goes through the meat grinder, and I don't care what happens to them. But if you're motivated by the wisdom from above, you're going to be full of mercy and concern about what happens to other people. I saw two Christians at church arguing one day, and they were both mature Christians. They realized it was getting a little bit heated, but it was one of those academic discussions where they were arguing about who was right. And they looked around them. These are mature Christians. They looked around them, and they saw some people watching them, and they both just stopped talking. Why? Because they realized they might be able to disagree with one another and get a little mad, and they'd get over it. But their younger brothers and sisters in Christ, they might be destroyed by watching that. And they said, okay, what's important is what's happening to everybody else. We need to make sure that we have a concern, a kindness for those around us. And then he gives these last three, good fruits, unwavering, and without hypocrisy. Good fruits really means that there's good byproducts from what you're doing. Being unwavering has the idea of being impartial. In other words, you speak to this person who is an elder, and you speak to them with respect. You speak to this person who is a deacon, you speak to them with respect. You speak to this person who's a church member, you speak to them with respect. You speak to this person who's a bum off the street who's in our church for the first time, and you speak to them with the same level of respect. Why? Because you're impartial and you treat everyone the same way. You are unwavering. And the last is without hypocrisy. This idea of hypocrisy, this is literally the Greek word for an actor, somebody who would put a mask on their face and play a part, and then they would turn around and be somebody else. They will speak kind words to your face, but really in their heart there is hatred for you, and they want what you have, and they are trying to destroy you. And the person who is motivated by wisdom from above, they have none of that. The person you see is the person that you get. When they come before you and they speak to you and they say, I love you, I'm praying for you, brother, I want what's best for you, that is actually what is in their heart and they mean. Why? Because this is a wisdom from above. And now he goes on in verse number 18, and he says, and the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. He's planting a picture here of somebody who is planting a seed, and this seed grows into a tree, and the fruit or the byproduct from that tree is righteousness. So if we want to get righteousness, if we have this wisdom that is informing us from above, we want to plant this seed, and the byproduct's going to be righteousness, and he's telling us it is sown in the soil of peace. But also the people that sow the seed that produces righteousness, it is sown by people who make peace. Let me tell you, the people with selfish ambition and this harsh jealousy, this envy within their heart, they are not sowing in peace. They are not people who make peace. Those of us who have wisdom from above, if we want to have righteousness to develop and to grow, we must first be people, as described in the verse before, and those who make peace and sow the seed in peace. But we have to be willing to fight for it. It's one of the interesting things about peace, isn't it? You have to do a lot of work, hard work. And sometimes there are other people that you have to fight against in order to have that peace. So what does he say here? The seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. And the question is, are you willing to be a peacemaker? We've looked today and we've seen first, a wise believer will show his wisdom by his conduct in verse 13. We've seen also unwise believer should not use his tongue and boast and lie against the truth. Number 3, we've seen that an unwise believer's wisdom comes from below. It's motivated by things that are earthly, natural, and demonic. And a wise believer's wisdom comes from above and leads to peace and grows righteousness. So, what does that mean for you and me? Well, number 1, we need to show our wisdom by our deeds. We need to have the principles, the understanding in our mind that guide our conduct, and we need to show our wisdom by our deeds and say, okay, this is not as important as this. This is much safer. Number 2, we don't need to use wisdom from below. If you're one of those people and you find that there is jealousy and there is envy, there is selfish ambition in your heart, you need to begin and say, Lord, help me first to see this clearly because sin always blinds us. And Heavenly Father, help me to change and begin to change. How do you change? Well, you can begin by learning to live by wisdom from above. To be this type of person who is pure and peaceable, gentle, compliant, full of pity, with good fruits, impartial, sincere. And then we can be the type of people who sow the seed that will produce righteousness in peace, because we are those who make peace.